William, your videographer from Two Hats Publishing. Welcome to the College of Complexes, being held at Barbeck's Restaurant at 8949 Garland Road, Dallas, Texas. Gently embracing the east side of White Rock Lake. When I entered, I was greeted like coming home to Grandma's house, warm and friendly. When visiting the Barbeck's Restaurant, tell them you want your reservations for the next College of Complex class.
It is. But in the meantime, just so you know, most of you have been here before, and I think all of you have been here before, so I don't need to go through all this. But we do put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require they take a position on an issue, express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give them an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, remind them that we only listen to one fool at a time. That's one of our rules. We live up to it. And then after we have our speaker do that, we have questions and answers, and then remarks, rebuttals. Everyone in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at this podium to respond to what the speaker said for or against. Our speaker gets a comment and close the meeting. He gets the last word. So that's how it works. Anyway, before we introduce our speaker, are there any comments? Anybody have any comments they want to make or announcements they want to make? Come on up here. Got announcements. Now is the time for announcements. Jim Davis has an announcement.
Two announcements. How many of you heard on the Monday night news that China will surpass the U.S. economy later this year? Heard that? Okay. I don't know about you all, but I like living in the most powerful country on earth. But anyway, also, they voted on the minimum wage last week in the Senate. If anybody would like to see historical data regarding unemployment figures and GDP growth figures and the dates and the amounts of the minimum wage, let me know, because nearly in every case, unemployment went down, GDP growth rate went up right after the increase. You can email me if you would like to see these charts. I've got them on charts. As a matter of fact, the one in 1950 resulted, the raise in 1950 from 40 cents to 75 cents, GDP growth rate went from minus 1.6 to 10.4% in 4 months. Biggest in history. Anybody want my email address? I'll send these charts. Let me know.
Any other announcements? You got any announcements you want to make? You have announcements you want to make? Now's the time. If you want to make any announcements, just wondering if you had one. So.
It's summer.
Yeah, okay, it's summer. Yeah, first day. Today's not the first day of summer. June 21st is the first day of summer.
I'm not talking calendar. I'm talking physical reality.
Oh, all right. Then it might be okay. Well, I have one announcement. We don't have a speaker for next week, so if somebody wants to be a speaker, let me know. You want to be a speaker next week? All right. Okay. We need a subject and all, Well, that's on May 19th. Someone else will be here. Yeah. Yes?
I will say that summer was officially delayed by global warming.
Okay. What do you...
It was in the 80s. It was in the 80s.
Anyway, so Jim will be our speaker next week. That's great. I don't know what he's going to talk about, but he'll give me something. It'll be good, I'm sure. Whatever you want to, whatever, it's just as long as you're for or against something, it's all that's required,
Could we be both?
Huh?
Could we be both?
I suppose.
Minimum wage history.
Well, fine. Whatever you want to talk about, something that people are interested in. All right. Minimum wage history and
Let's put it this way. Income, Middle class income.
You gotta be for or against something. You gotta be for improving.
I'm against the middle class losing buying power.
All right, good. Yes.
What about who really invented the yo-yo?
Ask him, he's our speaker. Yeah.
Well, this group should care.
Okay, well, our speaker tonight is Calvin Bluiett. He's an adjunct government professor at Clear Valley College. Cedarville. He's got a BA from Prairie View University, an MA from University of North Texas. He's an insurance supervisor in underwriting, social science teacher, field representative for Office of Economical Opportunity, public health analysis, and a team leader, and a consultant. He's going to discuss he's going to talk about what impact will our federal debt have on America's future economy. He's going to discuss how bipartisan leadership is needed if we are ever to find a workable solution, how moderates cannot remain silent, but must manifest to the radical conservatives and liberals that their incinerations are not the only voices in this debate. That we must look beyond greed and what is best for the individual, group, or party, and instead focus on what is best for America. Calvin further argues that citizens from both political parties must be involved and apply bipartisan political pressure in order for Congress to act responsibly, and will show how, in his view, the Democratic Party's approach offers the best hope for a solution to the United States debt crisis. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Calvin Bluiett. You get the floor.
Steve been putting me to work. Thank you, Tom, for those kind remarks. I came up with this idea because there is a debate, and has been an ongoing debate, on how we're going to deal with the deficit that's been created. And I really have focused on what has happened in this area really during my adult life. And I'm starting off with the figures in 1980 when President Reagan was elected president, down through 2012 in President Obama's administration. Let's see, how did the deficit increase, and what did we do to cause the deficit to exceed? We often complain about federal income tax. And I don't know, I'm not the poorest person in the country, and I'm most certainly not the richest one. But my wife and I pay less than 10% of our gross income for income tax. And I don't get a high-powered accountant do my income tax. I do mine myself. And compared to other nations, it's not that onerous. And my concern, I'm not arguing about the 10% that I pay in income tax. I'm concerned about how the money is allocated and who benefits and who pays. And so that's what I'm concerned about. So many people argue, particularly since 2008, that that all the deficit the debt that we have is emanated since 2009. And I want to go through first. And so my question is, what has been the evolution of the national debt from 1980 through 2012? When President Carter's term was over in 1981, and President Reagan took over, we owed less than $1 trillion. The national debt was less than $1 trillion, close to $1 trillion. And I got these numbers from Google's. There was no major military exercise. We did have some problems with Iran. And if any of us know the history of American foreign policy, to know that what happened in Iran, and we used the CIA to create a revolution in Iran and put our person in power, the Shah, and we kicked Khomeini out, and we paid for a villa for him in France. And when Carter became president and saw it, he struck that he stopped funding it, and Khomeini came back to Iran, and things have been different ever since. So that was the only thing. We tried, they kind of captured the Americans that was in our embassy in Iran, and we tried to go and get the people out, and we failed. And that created a great deal of problems, but we actually didn't have any military thing. So Carter was very, very conservative economically. So the debt grew very little during his administration, although the last 2 years of his 4-year term, the oil prices went up, and that created a great deal of inflation, particularly in 1979 and 1980. And that was during the same time that the Vietnam War was scaling down. We actually reduced the size of the military, cut the costs a great deal, and then the last year of President Carter's administration, he began to increase defense spending, and President Reagan continued that. President Reagan, when he left office in 1988, the federal debt was $2.7 trillion. And the primary cause of that is he cut taxes twice. And I guess I personalized some of this stuff because of how it impacted me. And that was the time my twins were born. And the first tax cut was $10 a pay period. That wouldn't buy their Similac. That's the milk we had to feed them. And then the next $10, it still wasn't enough to buy the Similac. Well, but that happened. And so when you cut taxes, and that was a broad-based tax because almost everybody benefited from that tax. And that pulls a lot of money out of the revenue for the federal government. And at the same time, it increased defense spending tremendously. And so that's primarily what caused that to do. Another thing that happened during his administration, after he had cut taxes, he recognized the deficit was growing too fast, and he was concerned about that. And he went and did somewhat of an overhaul of the income tax structure. But what happened for middle-class people, we hurt, because during that time, that was the highest increase in tax for me in my whole working career, because he took away all the deductions. The only thing I could write off was mortgage, charitable contributions, and I believe sales tax. Property tax. That's all he could write off. And so that increased my tax bill more than has ever been increased in my life. And so that kind of helped him a great deal. And a couple other things. I was kind of critical of Mr. Reagan, President Reagan, but he did some other things. He recognized he made a mistake and he tried to correct it. And he did something that Republicans won't do now. He passed an immigration bill. An immigration bill that did what the Democrats and a few Republicans are arguing should be done now, with a citizenship track. If you've been here 5 years and no crime or criminal record, then you will put on a citizenship track and become an American citizen. The Republicans today don't want to have a citizenship track. The other thing, he extended the Voting Rights Act during his administration and strengthened. So everything, and he also stabilized the Social Security program. But many people have misunderstood the Social Security program, I think, because it has its own funding mechanism, and he's the one who increased it where they paying Social Security tax up to $117,000 now. People said they ought to pay Social Security tax on all they earn, like most of us do. But he did that, and it really kind of stabilized the Social Security program in Medicare. So he did some things that we are still benefiting from today. In 1992, President Bush was elected president. And when he left office, we owe $4.5 trillion as a national debt. Now, President Bush, there was no war that we was involved in during his administration, except Desert Storm, which was short. And I don't know whether you remember the history of that, Japan and Germany put up most of the money. We just put the men out there in the Desert Storm. They paid a great deal of the cost of the war because they were benefiting from it because Iraq had invaded Kuwait, and we went in. And once that was over, we put sanction, no-fly zone, and it worked quite well. Some people said we should have gone into Iraq further. But so that was the only war, and President Bush one was he only served 4 years. And President Clinton was elected president in not 2000. He was elected president in 1992, and President Bush left office in 1992. And when President Clinton left, we owed $5.6 trillion. During his administration, he slowed the growth of the national debt, and we had by 3 years with a balanced budget. The operating budget was balanced, but the Social Security is where we created the projected surplus. And as a result of that, he slowed the growth of the debt, and he also increased taxes. The tax increase that he implemented didn't affect me, but it affected some people. And then President Bush too was elected in 2000, and he started his term in 2001. And when he left office in 2008, we owed $10.6 trillion. During his administration, there were two tax cuts. It was really not a tax cut that something was there forever. It was just like a one-time tax rebate that you got twice. I think it was. And for the wealthy people, it was a bonanza for them. But for working class people like myself, it wasn't. I could have very well lived without it, and not have the increase in the national debt. So we had two wars, and many political scientists argue that those are two wars was wars of choice. They were not like World War I and II, and that we should have learned something in Vietnam for going in there. So we are still involved. We pulled the troops out of Iraq, but we have still no troops in Kuwait and in that area. And it still costs money to do that. And my take on, we could have used the CIA to get bin Laden. It may have taken a couple of years, but we wouldn't have created the negative animosity that we have other nations because it had been done quick, kind of like it did when they finally got it. And the same thing with Saddam Hussein. We knew he didn't have any weapons of mass destruction because he fought a war with Iran in which we supported him and sold him all the military armament that he had. We knew exactly what he had, but there was another motivation for that war. President Bush, as a person, is a likable man. I find it difficult to understand some of the policies that he implemented, but I think Vice President Dick Cheney was probably responsible for most of that, and I haven't found my observation of him is he wasn't too much concerned about what's best for the United States, but what's best for him. He was the CEO of Halliburton, and they have huge contracts. And actually, after he left being Secretary of Defense, he didn't go back to be a congressperson, but he worked as a kind of a mediator to get contracts for large contractors, in particular Halliburton. And that's how he got to be CEO of that company. So the other thing is, because of deregulations, and most of us heard that, deregulation didn't start with President Bush II. It actually started with President Carter, and President Clinton also expanded deregulation because of the banking law, the Glass-Steagall Act, was actually repealed. Senator Phil Gramm was the person initiated in the Senate, and President Clinton signed that law that did away with that. It created an environment for deregulations in a number of broad areas in industry and in the Federal Reserve System. They had regulations, they didn't enforce them because Sherman Greenspan was really a disciple of Ayn Rand, and he really truly believed, but he acknowledged his mistake. The gentleman that was over the Securities and Exchange Commission never admitted the error, and he had a little bit more jurisdiction than the Federal Reserve System did. And as a result of that, we had too much speculation, similar to what we had in the Depression of 1929. And that too was because we built those safeguards in and we took them away. And so we moved in the same direction. So as a result of that, during President Bush II's term, the latter part of his term, they passed the law to bail out banks and brokerage companies at $700 billion. And so I think that was counted against President Obama's budget, but it was actually enacted before he was president. So his policies had not been good for the nation, and we will suffer from those policies some years into the future. And then going into, at the end of 2008 and 2009, President Obama was assumed president, was term started. And we were at a verge of a depression, and so the Economic Recovery Act was enacted. Well, that was $800 and something billion additional money. And so, and with the two wars and all that going on, the deficit grew. And he also, a part of the Economic Recovery Act was a tax cut, and it was very, very minimum for me, but I think some people may have done better. And then when they had the debt ceiling crisis, and they finally was able to reach some kind of consensus on that, they reduced what you pay in Social Security about 2%. And that's really what triggered the deficit in the Social Security program. If that 2% had not been pulled out, it would have been still a break-even situation. But everybody wants tax cuts. They want tax cuts. And everybody wants the programs that they benefit from, but they want someone else to pay for them. And so part of the problem we have is what we as citizens do. Now, what caused the federal deficit is the next thing I will look at. Increased federal spending. Ordinarily in the history of the United States, when we have a war, we increase taxes to cover the cost of the war. We didn't do that when we went into Iraq and Afghanistan. We didn't increase taxes at all. We cut taxes. And we increased spending, and we added Part D to the Medicare program, which is a pharmacy program. And these programs were not funded. And so that exacerbated the federal deficit situation. And the economic recession created an environment we had to do something in order to try to keep from going into a depression. And many economists argued that the $800 billion was not enough, We should have spent more on infrastructure and probably not do the tax cuts, but those things were done, and so what do we do as a result of that? Now, as of 2014, the deficit is 16 trillion. The next thing I want to move to is somewhat of analysis of the budget that have been proposed that will deal with the federal debt situation. I'm going to deal with one of the first. President Obama appointed the Simpson-Bowles, that was a committee, to come up with a program, a recommendation to deal with the national debt. Many economists, not all, believe that we should have been worrying too much about the national debt. We should have been worried about expanding employment opportunities for people. And so there were a great deal of effort to do this. So the Simpson-Bowles plan calling for a 2.4 trillion in deficit reduction over the next decade. 3/4 of the savings would come from spending cuts, and the rest, about $600 billion, would come from tax increases. Entitlements, alluded to entitlements, Social Security program, including Medicare, is a huge entitlement program, but it has its own funding mechanism. And based on research, people who are receiving Social Security benefits or Medicare benefits are willing to pay more without cutting the benefits, and they have the mechanism for doing that. And what we do, whatever the surplus in the Social Security program, whatever it's been used to reduce the overall deficit for that year. And some people argue that they need to be separated, and then rather than, because that kind of diffuses it, is not really accurate of what they're looking at. So entitlement cut 4 trillion. Entitlements, reduce payment to Medicare and Medicaid providers, increase premiums for high earners, and adjust benefits to account from population aging. And what's that mean like that? We live longer, and we need to make some adjustments to increase the age of retirement from maybe 65 to 70. I think they've already increased it. It's going in pretty soon, a couple of years from now, to 67. Full retirement on Social Security is 67. Which is now 65. The proposal would also reduce annual cost of living adjustment for Social Security and also for federal employees. I think many argue that if you're a senior citizen, you don't have children in college. That's not true of all of them, because one of the ladies who was working with her daughter had died and left 3 children, and she was taking care of them, so she'll have to send them to college. So that's not, but generally speaking, if you live to be 65, if you don't have a house paid for, if you've had opportunities, maybe you need to live in a tent. But that's what they're looking at. And so they want to factor in something that would deal with that. But when you look at senior citizens, our health care cost is astronomically high. And even though Medicare it covers the most major part of it, but if you have a huge medical bill, the co-payment and the deductibles are pretty painful. And so I think when you factor that in, it's not what they said it is. And almost, I'm a senior citizen myself, and I have good insurance. My wife has been sick for 7 years, seriously sick. And if we had to pay that out of pocket, we wouldn't have nowhere to stay. So I know how important that is. So I don't know what that's specific. Taxes, they say call for overhaul of the taxing code that generate additional revenue by reducing or eliminating tax breaks, and some of the money raised from tax breaks would be used to lower the overall income tax rate, and some would be used for the deficit reduction, so they split it. So that's the Simpson-Bowles plan, and they made their report, and nothing really done about it. So as the deficit began to get worse during President Obama's administration, The Republicans submitted a plan, and the Democrats submitted a plan. I'm going to talk first about the Republican plan. They would cut $4.6 trillion over the next decade without tax increases. When you talk about cutting programs, the money is in, a lot of it's in farm subsidies, and the biggest parts in Social Security and Medicare. Those are the entitlements, and defense spending. So if you don't cut those programs, you don't have a lot of money to cut in the federal budget. So that's what they're saying. And so if you're going to cut that from an entitlement programs, they replace traditional Medicare for people now under 55. So you're going to have two systems: one for people my age that have Medicare and a little younger, and then the people who are 55 right now under this plan, they would be treated differently. The programs, the benefits would be cut for them. And so all this does is create animosity between older people and young people. And that's probably not a good plan. The subsidy to buy health insurance, they would give them a subsidy, like a voucher, to go and buy the health insurance on the market. And when you're 70 or 80 years old, you don't have the perseverance to deal with all that. And the subsidy or the voucher would not be able to buy a good policy. It's just like they talk about vouchers in public schools. If they give you a voucher, they divide the number of students and the total amount of money, and in Dallas that'd be like $8,000 a year, and you couldn't go to a good private school with $8,000 a year. So the people who are sitting there already doing it, it would be a bonanza for them. But there are a lot of poor people who would like to send their school children to a private school. They couldn't do it. If they do it, would be a school that would not be very good. So that's the same principle if you look at what they do with Medicare. Taxes call for an overhaul of the tax code, but does not increase revenue. If you're going to overhaul it and not increase revenue, what's the purpose? That's a part of theirs. Except for economic growth, the plan incorporates more than $600 billion in tax increases enacted in January. That was after they got together on a budget and they increased the taxes on people who are 400,000 or above, and that generates about $600 billion a year, and that's what they're talking about. Repeal Wall Street regulatory laws and cancel financial support for high-speed rail network. Cut Medicaid and make it a block grant. In other words, you give a state, this is the amount of money we're going to give you, do what you want to do with it. And you would have to provide Medicaid benefits, but it would be very, very limited. Okay, that's the Republican plan. And the plan that Paul Rand introduced in the House and passed the House is the same plan. The Democratic plan reduced government borrowing by $1.85 billion over the next decade, with a balance between spending cuts and revenue enhancements. Entitlement cut Medicare provider reimbursement by $275 billion over the next decade, but not reduce benefits. There are wastes in Medicare program, and sometimes it's hard to you have to have too many people to try to prevent it, and if you had the people, it still would happen. But if any of you on the Medicare, like we get a statement every time we see a doctor, and they tell you what Medicare is paying, and then my federal health benefit program picks up the rest. So there's no cost to me. My premiums go up, but that's a lot less onerous than trying to pay for this out of my pocket. But doctors are cut pretty materially. What they provide, the service they provide, is reduced materially. Hospitals, they kind of negotiate that agreement, and whatever they bill, they pay. And if you look at what make up those bills, an aspirin may cost $20. And so some of those things you can work on. So I think those are the things, that's some of the things they're looking at. I'm not talking about a bottle of aspirins, I'm talking about one. Okay. Overhaul the tax code to generate $975 billion in additional revenue by closing loopholes in the tax code that benefit the rich corporation community over the next decade. Growing the economy through job creation, infrastructure. Infrastructure is falling apart. And if you look at current stats on both the Federal Highway Trust Fund and the State Highway Trust Fund, we can't maintain the highways with that money. It's not enough. Texas is a huge state, huge highway system, and they can't manage. So that's why we have all these toll roads going up. And we have to have a different way to try to deal with that, because the money we're getting from the gasoline tax that we pay per gallon for the state and for the federal government is not adequate right now. We have a lot of dams in Texas and other states that the federal government, the Corps of Engineers constructed, and some of them need some work done on them. And we're doing a lot of work on 30 and 35 of these bridges. I don't know if you've been on that to see all that going on. They're selling bonds to do that. And so it's getting tight. Increase the minimum wage. That's something that many economies are organized for need to do. Immigration reform, we need to do that with a citizenship track. Insourcing, the CEO of GE, they pay very little in taxes, according to reports, but the CEO is over a program to bring jobs back to the United States from foreign countries, and they're finding that with technology, they can do the work here at less cost than they can in China and some of the other places. This is not for everything, but this is for some of the high-tech stuff. And they are moving it back. But the jobs are not the traditional kind of jobs. And the people who are unemployed from the traditional job loss and those traditional jobs, they can't get them. And these big, around Dallas, all you see is these warehouses going up. And they don't hire many people. They have robots doing what men used to do. And the only job you can get, really, is to maintain those robots, program those robots, and that's not a lot of people. So we've got to do something different. We need innovation, manufacturing innovation, and he cites in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Yorktown, Ohio, they're doing some of that now. Manufacturing hubs is something else we're experimenting with. Research and development, that's what we need to put more money in, but that's what creates opportunities. And if we don't put money in that area, we're going to become a second-rate nation. We are still, I think, leading in technology as a nation, but China is investing a lot in finance. China is getting a lot of our technology because, I don't know whether you asked the question, in World War II and Korea and Vietnam wars, I remember we had high employment, not high unemployment. I don't know whether you wondered why is it different this time, because we still spend a lot of money for military stuff that's been destroyed and new stuff, military implements, but it's not been manufactured in the United States, it's being manufactured somewhere else. And if someone is manufactured, they get the technology. And so that's what we're doing. And China has been alleged that they really get our information illegally. Education. One of Governor Perry's project paid off. Toyota is moving their home office to bring in 4,000 jobs. They talk about they're going to create, but they're going to bring 4,000. And they're having a housing problem. The housing cost is going to be exceedingly high, so they're going to have a lot of disgruntled employees. But it may not be higher than what it is in California. So we need to work with our students so that they can think. That's the problem I wrestle with every day. I just teach one course to kind of keep my mind occupied. With a sick wife, if you don't have something to do, I'll be sick as she is, just in the head. But the kids, the young people can recall pretty good. They can't put it together and use it. They can't think. And And if you look at it, China and India have a highly educated workforce as large as our total workforce in the United States. And that's what our young people are up against. And so we got to do better in what we're doing. And the test that we have in Texas for students doesn't encourage thinking. It encourages recall. And then when they get out, they can't do a job, because right now it's not like it used to be. You don't have anybody standing over you telling you what to do. You got to be able to do the job yourself. And they come up with these teams, and those kinds of things is what we got to focus on. And so that's some of the things that's in the president's plan. The last part of my report is the national debt must begin with a bipartisan leadership and a serious debate between Republicans and Democrats regarding America's debt crisis in order to find common ground and a workable solution to this problem. That isn't happening right now. I contend that if American voters are given the correct information, we'll probably make the right decision. But right now you get different information, packaged differently, and you really don't know what. And it's the thing we do is we go with what sounds simple and with our mind can be done. But it's nothing is simple when you're dealing with people. We are complicated individuals. And what we're dealing with now is human resource problems with people, and we're not investing a great deal in it. But politicians must ensure that American voters are given the facts in this debate so that voters can discern what's best for our nation. The merits of the two plans and the long-range impact each plan will have on the American economy. The real question is which plan will improve our economy or exacerbate this economic dilemma. Currently, partisan polarization make it highly improbable that the two parties will manifest a bipartisan approach. And my position is that the moderates, the majority of Americans, by all indication, are moderates. They're not extreme liberals or conservatives. They're moderate. But we don't hear moderate voices. And when President Reagan was president, we had moderate Democrats and Republicans in Congress. And I think that's kind of what saved the day. We don't have that no more. It's either one way or the other way, and no compromise. And when you have that kind of situation, you got to do nothing. Now, the national debt is something to work on. Not only do we have a national debt, but we have a trade deficit. A trade deficit that compounds the problem. And with NAFTA, we have this among Canada, United States, and Mexico, and we have deficits with both Canada and Mexico. We just signed a similar agreement with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea, and the same thing will be happening. And we're working on another one in the Pacific. And we're trying to get one similar, all of Central and South America, similar types of agreement. But I think we need to be focused on fair trade, not free trade. We need to be dealing with a way where we can be competitive, because the way we're dealing with it is we're not competitive, and so we're not benefited from it. If we don't do something with the national debt, it's going to hurt us. Most of you have heard the situation in the state of Kansas. Have you heard that? Well, they have a Republican governor, and he cut taxes, the state income tax and other taxes, and they're almost bankrupt. And they're having a vote in the state of Missouri, currently, to do the same thing, but the Democratic governor says he's going to veto it because he doesn't want, and their credit standard rate has lowered in Kansas, so their cost to borrow money for bonds is going to be more expensive. And so cutting taxes is not really the solution to the problem, but we need better management of the programs we have, and we've got to recognize that the people in the United States are becoming, we have more and more people, a growing ratio of people with emotional problems. If you got emotional problems, holding a job is going to be difficult. And you see it in schools where students have emotional problems that make it impossible for them to be competitive. And those are some of the things we got to look at. It's just not the national debt. And if, in most cases, it isn't the Congress that want to do it, it's interest groups that want to do it. But as Thomas said, we have the best Congress that money can buy. And Norquist is in Missouri lobbying state legislators to cut taxes. And you know, all the Republican Congress and probably some of the Democrats have signed this oath not to increase taxes. And I think that's treason because they swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. And I don't see it in some of their behavior. So those are some of the things we need to look at. I think we need to look at some realistic solutions. Social Security has its own funding mechanism. Use that and deal with efficiency as much as can be done. And I think those programs will be okay. I don't want Medicare to go away. It's a big part of my health care. My federal employees' health benefit plan, I say to pay the same premiums or more since I've been retired as I did when I was working. But it helps. It's good to have them both. And the only thing we've had to buy, my wife needs a chair to help her lift up. And they bought the motor, which was a small part of it, but the chair cost $1,000. That's all we've been out of in money. And I think everybody ought to have that kind of plan. But you got to pay for it. It's not going to be free. Somebody got to pay. And so that's what I'm saying. It's not just the national debt. It's who benefits from public policy and who pays. And, you know, it's more of us working people than the rich. And if the working people can get beyond the peripheral issues that divide and polarize us, I think we can come together collectively and make changes. Most congressmen like that job. If they had to get out of a job like Tom and I had to do, they probably wouldn't do quite as well. They really wouldn't. They would have to work more than they've been working the last few years. They're on vacation most of the time. But if we wait for Congress to do it, it won't happen, because Congress people and elected officials, people who give them money is really who their constituents are. If you don't give them money and work in their election, you know, if they know you, they may do something, but basically they're concerned about this greed that's driving stuff. And the people, we have a system that if we can get beyond our own little perceptions and agree on what's best for this nation, it will happen. Multinational corporations don't have any loyalty to no country. No country. It's about 3,000 people that meet in Switzerland 3 or 4 times a year. Basically, CEOs and chief finance officers of multinational corporations. And they plan for the world. And it's not what's best for an individual nation. It's best for their bottom line. And we need to wake up and understand this. And whatever these little issues we have among and between us, forget about them. And think about what's best for the nation. Not something that's going to be beneficial to me, but something that's going to be beneficial to everybody. Where if everybody play by the rules, they'll do all right. And so I'm saying that's what we got to do. Republicans and Democrats, moderates. I don't think the liberals, the radical liberals and the conservatives will ever do this. But the moderate, who's the majority of the people, we must speak up, because God gave us a great nation, a great real estate, and we are destroying it. And that we're not destroying, we sell it. Some of the best real estate in America doesn't belong to citizens of the United States. So that's what I think. I thought about this, and I talked with Tom a little bit the last time I was here, because it's something I've been thinking about. Is, you know, we just look at something the way it is and come to some kind of conclusions of what we ought to do. Cutting taxes, you know, I think corporate taxes ought to be cut to 25%. I think we'll get more than we're getting now because we're not getting hardly anything now, because that would make it competitive in the global community. And I think that should be done, and that also has been proposed by President Obama. Now, the three plans, the Bowles-Simpson, the Republican plan, they all talk about looking at revising the income tax system. But Simpson-Bowles has said you revise to enhance revenue and simplify it. And President Obama, the Democrats plan to do the same thing, but the Republicans said no, net on zero, neutral on revenue, but just cut taxes. And that system don't work anymore. We should have known that at the last Depression, but it's not individual companies. Individual companies get together, get legislatures to pass laws that benefit them and cost us money. And the whole debt is our debt. It's not just the rich people's debt that the multinational corporation debt. It's all of our debt. And I hate to leave this debt on our young people when many of them have $100,000 student loans they got to struggle with. I don't know how they're going to make it. If I'd have had a $10,000 student loan when I graduated from college, I couldn't have made it. Because you don't make that much money to pay off a loan and pay your rent and eat and some kind of transportation. So that's my take on it. I think the Democratic plan offers the best hope because it's a balanced approach. We recognize that I think their plan would probably increase some taxes for a larger segment of society, not only just the rich. But we all sit still and let this happen, and we're going to all have to sacrifice to correct it. Thank you. Okay.
Let me see him while I talk. Hello, Calvin. How old are the kids you teach?
They're all just out of high school. I have a couple of maybe in the 30s.
Oh, is this community college?
Yes.
I'm hearing the same thing from people I know. I have family that teach like that age. Thank you.
I thought you gave a very good presentation, although philosophically I disagree with a lot of it, as you might well know.
I know that, so it's okay. That's okay. We can disagree and not become disagreeable.
Of course. I respect you very much. I'm quite pleased to see how well you've accomplished in life. You talked about the modern technology producing a lot of robots like we see on automobile assembly lines displacing workers. How can you possibly resolve that with trying to let in more illegal immigrants? That's just creating more of people on the dole of the government.
Well, one first thing, the United States government.
No, it's on the microphone.
Okay. Maybe I'm trying to get not to be heard. The federal government is not encouraging illegal immigrants to come here. If you look at the study of the immigration policy from way back, and it first started, it was really biased against Southern Europeans. And then we came with a quota system, so it's limited. No, the government is not encouraging people to come here from Mexico. Now, we bring in a large number of people with skilled visas, and they come over with a skilled visa from India and Asia and a number of other countries. They work our system, they can become citizens if they want to. And we do that. The corporation said that we don't have trained people in the United States, that's why they do it. I don't know how true that is, but that's the reason they give for it. My thing is, like the DREAM Act, children didn't ask us to bring them in the world. We brought them in the world and we're responsible for them. So the children that came from Mexico and others, primarily we're talking about people from Central and South America, their parents brought them over here. And in the dream process, an executive order picked up part of it, would say you could stay, you don't have to be and go to school, because it's hard for them to go to college because they're supposed to go back to here illegally. I think if we have a law that says it's illegal, it's illegal. If we don't want them to come in here, we need to do away with the law saying it's illegal. If we have a law, it ought to be a fair law, and we ought to enforce it. But the remedy is, build a wall or build a fence. And if you go in some parts between Mexico and California, they dig tunnels. They find ways to get here. And so once if they've been here 5 years and we haven't dealt with it, we ought to, they're probably working and they're probably paying taxes. It's not true that if you live in Texas and you buy something, you're going to pay sales tax. And you may get paid in the black market cash, and you may get, but even if the employer is going to require you to have a Social Security card. Many of them are not valid Social Security cards, but they pay Social Security and they're not really eligible for it. But it's a complex process, and in the immigration situation. And I think the planners behind NAFTA thought that might solve the problem, that they would create opportunities for them in their own country, and they would stay over there. But that didn't work. That hasn't worked. Yes?
Calvin, would there be immigration, people crossing the border from Mexico, if there were not employers here in the USA waiting to hire them?
That's why they come. And President Reagan's law had a piece in there to penalize them, but they didn't enforce it. And they didn't have but a very few people to enforce it. That's how the federal government does when they don't want to enforce something. They don't hire nobody. And the few people they have can't deal with it. So that's part of the problem. If there was no job, it's just like drugs. If the demand wasn't in the United States, they wouldn't come here either. The supply follows demand. Yes.
Do you actually think there's any chance of a bipartisan working Congress?
I don't see it in Congress right now. But what I'm talking about, I know some Republicans. And many of us have the same concepts of what should be done. And many of us have, many of them, the one that I talk to, we don't see a big divide. So that's why I said the moderates need to speak up. If we speak up and we get on as collectively on the congressmen, they'll either straighten up or we'll elect someone who will. That's the only way I think we're going to get it. As long as, a congressman, if he can get $1,000 from, 2 or 3,000 people, that may be all he or she needs. He don't want to get, $25 or $100. That won't cut it. I can understand that, but if they take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and they're not doing it. If they were, they would find places where they can compromise and get a balanced approach to deal with this.
One more question. Don't you think campaign finance reform should be on the ticket?
Well, I've been signed on to a number of petitions asking for Citizens United to be repealed, and the McClellan, a constitutional amendment changed it. Congress, the courts.
Do you think they'll actually change it? Why would they want to?
Well, they wouldn't want to on their own. It's going to take pressure from both Democrats and Republicans, citizens, to put pressure on our congressmen. I get a lot of stuff from Senator Cruz, and we are really not on the same page. And I get a lot of stuff on the email from Senator Carney. We are not on the same page. They're more lecturing me rather than responding to the question that I asked. Yeah, they benefit from it. And I tell you, $170,000 for that a guy that's not a successful attorney, successful businessman, that's pretty good money, because only 10% of American people make $100,000 or above. And so, yes, they want that job. And if we as citizens don't do what we're supposed to do, But we got to get over some of the peripheral issues that we get hang-ups with. And we get over that, I think that's the only way we can solve this problem. It's going to be slow, but if we do it, it'll be solved. Because they're going to go where the money is. Well, a few of us have principles. I'm an old man now, so I don't, if I had a bunch of money, I wouldn't live differently. I'm too old. But if I was a young man, I probably would do some things different. Yes.
This was a minor point, but you said that nowadays we have more emotional problems.
We do.
I wonder if you know why.
I don't know. Well, the only reason I can conclude to that, I remember the senator was selected by Senator McGovern to run on the ticket with him, and he had a mental problem and had gotten it correct. I don't know what was schizophrenia. We didn't know about bipolar then. I've forgotten that sentence. We've had these mental institutions. I remember when I grew up, Russ, Texas was where the mental institution was. So when people got off the rocks, they sent them to Russ. They'd be down there a while and they come back home. Then they get in trouble again and go back to Russ and they die. And so in the 60s and 70s, we did what we call deinstitutionalization of people. And basically, people with schizophrenia and probably something like bipolar, we didn't know what it was at that time. But we have medication that they can take if they take the medicine. We put them out and give them a prescription and then give them money to get it filled. So that's what happened to it. So I think a lot of it is genetic. And that's part of growing. And you take like poor children, extremely poor children who have poor parents, that contributes to them. I noticed when I was teaching, young people had more issues than I had. And I tried hard to be certain that my children didn't have that because they didn't know if I had a problem. I tell a story of one of my twin daughters. They were daddy's girls and they didn't want to disappoint daddy. So I told them when President Reagan was elected president, the agency that I worked for, he was virtually going to abolish it. So I just told him, I said, Daddy would probably have to get another job. And so they had a writing assignment at school, and she wrote a letter to President Reagan. Man, she was really blessed, and don't take my daddy's job. So when you have problems and you pass it on to your children, that affects them. And I think in a lot of children, there's problems all the time. And that's what it is. Most of us cannot imagine what these children go through. And so it's I had a good family, wasn't a perfect family, but they were there, and they, we didn't lack for nothing. But a child can get nervous and upset about something if they don't understand it. Many people who get divorced as children think they are the cause of it, and that affects them too. And the children are fragile. You do something to them. I had a lady that, was trying to get something out of me, and she finally, I told her, and then she told my father, and he tied me up, took us to the woodshed. And I never liked that lady after that. I never liked her at all. I loved her as a person, but I didn't trust her. And that's something, I think that's contributed to it. It's a complex thing. Some of it's genetics. My wife's illness is genetics. And so it's a lot of genetics in Alzheimer's. They find a great deal of that is genetics. So I don't know all the answers, but I think that's part of what it is these young people in troubled homes, they're going to come away troubled. And that's part of it. That's the emotional. And we don't know how to deal with that because we find out too late. Any more questions? Well, I'm ready for the rebuttals then.
My one question is I can't remember history or give you facts on it, but I remember the government actually stepping down on some company that was planning to move out of the country, take the business, the shops and machinery and everything, and the government came in and stepped on it, told them, you're not leaving. That's just my purpose for my question. The question is, when companies do move out of the United States, they take their businesses, their phone centers and whatnot, how does that affect our national trade deficit? Does it help it in a way? Do they consider that a sale to another country and take that off our deficit? And that way the government likes to do this?
I think the government is doing what Tone says. We have the best Congress that money can buy.
It's considered an export. When they take machinery out of the country, it's considered an export.
That's probably what it's considered.
It's considered an export.
But did they buy it?
Against the
Was
trade
it made in the United States and purchased from the United States?
It's like if you have a machine shop, you close it down and ship the machinery to China, that is an export.
No, that's a paper export. It doesn't help us a great deal. Well, the big thing is they have a tax system that encourages it. And a trade policy, which is tied to taxes. If you make a profit in a foreign country, you don't pay income tax. And many of them use creative accounting. If they make a profit in the United States, they transfer it to a foreign country. Don't pay no income.
Set up a corporation in China, they own half of it. That's not a tax. I don't know what is.
Yeah, well, I know they have some. I don't know why they would want to go over there because China is on the winning end of all of this, and then they sell a bunch of stuff here. My big concern in that issue is most of the companies that's manufacturing stuff in China sell it in the United States, and if we don't have money, we can't buy it. And I don't see why. The whole world is interrelated economically. And I use something like, if we make really efficient automobiles and they get better gas mileage, what is that going to do for our highway trust fund? But we have to balance all this out. And that's what I'm saying, a balanced approach to do it. And I know some of the points the Republicans are making in them is, we have to consider that. We have to have something that benefits all of us and not just a few of us. Any more questions?
I think that's it.
Okay.
Oh, he's got one. Here he is.
You said we needed moderate voices and not extreme voices on the left or the right. I was curious, which voices do you hear that are extreme coming from the left? Because I don't hear them.
There's a radical group of liberals in the Democratic Party, and you saw it when it was working on the Affordable Health Care Act. There were members in the House of Representatives in the Democratic Party said they wasn't going to vote if it didn't have that some kind of option, and they wanted a single payer. And you have that on a number of issues that come up. We have problems. President Obama has problems with Democrats and Republicans. And those are the records. I mean, some of the voices you hear are rational. I remember once when I was working in health planning and with Louisiana, was never able to get Louisiana to pass a certification of need legislation. That was what I was supposed to be trying to get them to do. And it was a gentleman was appointed over the program, and he was a Republican. But I could work with him easier than I could with liberal Democrats. He was practical. And some of
they have as much.
I mean, it may be more radical Republicans than there are Democrats. I don't know, but there are people that just speak from opinion and not something they have thought a great deal about. Yes.
How do you perceive? What do you think will happen in this country if it continues as it is, without any kind of ability to have any consensus and the constant fighting among the whatever political parties you may have, and the decline of the middle class? What is your prediction for the U.S.?
If we don't get our act together, we're going to become a third world nation. And it's going to be almost a base for a revolution in this country. Because a lot of people putting out stuff to people is not practical. It's not workable. And if they get in power, if they get to Congress and the president, it's not going to get any better. And then they're going to react to it because they become disillusioned. I talked with a gentleman who said he was involved in 2008, and went down to the state convention, and he wanted to go to the national convention, and he wasn't on the click. He didn't get to go. So he's bitter. And I told him, I said, you know, in the same 2008, I was working on this platform and resolution committee, and we were trying to finish our work, and my precinct didn't send for me when they voted, so I didn't get to go to the state convention. So and I never hardly get to go to the national convention. But you know, everybody have their cliques and their systems. It's not an open system. I don't know about the Republican Party, but I know about the Democratic Party. It's not an open system. If you're not in with the clique, you're not going to go. And that's unfortunate. That's not fair. That's not right. But that's the reality. So what I told him, you need to get in and get involved. You know, if I wanted to go, if I get to the state, I can get to the national convention if I want to, but I don't care that much about going. I was on the platform committee in 2004, so I went and observed. I couldn't vote. I wasn't a delegate. But I just, because I was teaching, and I wanted to be able to teach what really happened. So that's why I wanted to go, not so much for the other reason. Yes?
Can you tell us what you did for the government when you worked for them and what you teach?
Well, I teach government. I teach government. And I have, my degrees are in political science and government, but government, they have called it government at UT, it's political science. It's the same curriculum.
But you said you had a government pension. Did you work for the government?
I retired from the federal government. I worked for OEO for two years as an Office of Economic Opportunity. Back in 1964, Head Start, Jobs Corps, all that was community action was part of OEO. And I moved in Medicare Bureau. I worked in Medicare Bureau 2.5 years. And then I moved into public health because the Assistant Secretary of Health, Nixon, was an advocate for the National Health Insurance Program. And they enacted Professional Standards Review Organization, health planning, to prepare for it. And then I was, in public health, we funded community health centers, migrant health centers, family planning programs, maternal and child health programs, and homeless programs and HIV programs. Those are the kind of things. And after they stopped funding the health planning program, I was a team leader for a primary care operation in Texas and Oklahoma. We administered about $35 million in federal money in projects in those two states. And that's what I retired from. So that's why I get a federal retirement. I don't draw Social Security. We didn't.
It's interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any more questions?
Just one quick question. I keep wondering if we're ever going to be able to get local, state, and federal leaders to make the hard choices, because in order to fix this problem, there has to be hard choices made. We have to decide what we want to spend our money on. What's the most important thing to spend our money on? I don't think it should be tax breaks to ExxonMobil or Walmart. Exactly. That's the thing. I mean, the deficit is we spend more money than we bring in every year, and that just adds up to the debt. The problem is that, okay, here's the thing. So we have to figure out what we're spending the money on. Should it be going to ExxonMobil, Walmart, Iran, countries all over the world? And that's my question. What do you think? Do you think it's even possible for our leaders to make these hard choices?
If you look
local, state, or federal?
If you look at the history of presidents who have made very difficult decisions, I think President Lincoln made hard decisions, but he was forced to. And I think the decisions that President Roosevelt made, he was forced to because we were depression. We had to do something. He was forced to, and then he got a Democratic Congress, and he was able to do it. When President Obama was elected, we had the 60 senators, but not at the very beginning. It was about a year and a half, and then it didn't last long. We lost Senator Kennedy's seat, and it was 59. And then we lost the House in 2010, because the Democrats who passed the law ran away from it. And they should have been embracing it. They passed it, and they should have been explaining to the constituents why. But they ran away from it. And that's why I believe they lost. And, and since that time, Republicans have gained in governors and state legislatures. They're redistricting in a way that is unfair. And so it's hard to win with that kind of situation. My only hope is, like I indicated, is that people will wake up. We all have children and grandchildren, and we want to live a world for them and to have opportunities. So we need to be thinking about them. And if we get beyond what these little things that bother us, I don't think the state ought to play God. If a woman want to have an abortion, that's her choice. That shouldn't be the state's business. The church can do all it can, but not coerce it, but influence. And if we don't wake up, we do have a framework to deal with it, but we can't be bickering among ourselves. And I mean, that's hard. But I think if everybody across the board, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you're hurting. You're hurting because your money you earn buys less, and you're hurting. If you not working for a company and before affordable health care, you had to buy health insurance, you couldn't buy it. Even the Affordable Care Act makes it possible. You get the same. It's a community rating system rather than an experience rating system. So that makes everybody get the same treatment rate. But that's what I think, and my hope is that we'll wake up and practical people wake up. So look, and I think the Occupy Wall Street raised the level of consciousness of a large number of middle class people in America. And I think more and more of that will help. That's the congressman, like I said, if they're doing okay, they think the world's doing okay. And I had a cartoon, I used political cartoons to try to get students to thing, and they had this lady that was pregnant. And the pro-life said, we're going to be with you always. We're going to say we don't have no abortion. And she had the baby, and they said, you slow, you on your own now. So that's kind of the way it works. Yes.
I've heard before or read somewhere that the economists, mathematicians, actuaries, whatever, have figured out that it's become a mathematical impossibility to ever pay off our $16 trillion national debt. That's a mathematical impossibility because we're paying how many hundreds of billions a year to the central bankers right now, just an interest, who create the money out of thin air by making a ledger entry into their system with no precious metals or gold or silver backing to give the pieces of paper any actual, real, meritorious, inherent store of pecuniary value, so that it appears to be a bottomless pit of debt to the central bankers, which has become a mathematical impossibility to pay off at this point. Is what I've heard somewhere or read somewhere. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I'm very lucky to say something is impossible. If we do nothing, it's impossible. We aren't going to pay the $16 trillion back in 10 years, in 20 years, in 100 years. But we can start moving in the right direction. I'm going to use another paradigm, like state of Texas, state government is not supposed to have a deficit. City government, school districts, any other government, not supposed to have a deficit. But they borrow money by selling bonds. And as long as they can pay the principal and interest on the bond, that's a balanced budget, based on their definition of a balanced budget. So I think we got to start working on it. And if you look at the deficit in relationship to the gross national product, it's not as bad as it has been in some other early history of the nation. But I think I think a lot of people are conspiracy about the Federal Reserve System and all this kind of stuff. But I do know that when I look at history, and I look at the time we didn't have a national bank or a Federal Reserve System, we had chaos. And I've studied there was a group of people who wanted a gold standard, and when John Connally was Secretary of Treasurer, he got us off, and that was right, because it flowed based on the market. When I was in Germany, a dollar purchased 4 marks, but we pretty much controlled the international monetary exchange. So when he took that off, we was paying $43 an ounce, I believe, for gold. What is gold now? $1,000 an ounce or more? Yeah. So we don't have enough gold to follow to take care of our debt, so we can't have gold to back it. And silver, they've been arguing, there's people that say it ought to be silver, it should be gold. I think banks are necessary, but they have to have some regulations. There has to be a framework that should be working in. And without the Glass-Steagall Act and some kind of regulations, you don't have no real control of it. No, I'm not saying the government should control them, but the government should set a framework in which they should work. I think it is a way out. It's not going to be quick, but we got to start.
I think that's it for questions. Okay, now it's your turn to talk. So who wants to be first? There has to be a first. Come on up here. Jim Davis is first.
I'm going to be first, and then I'm going to have to leave the meeting.
You can't blast me and go home.
No, I'm not going to blast you. All I'm going to do is say you forgot to mention that President Reagan raised the tax rates on the bottom from 0 to 15%.
Yeah, I had that in my note, but I didn't.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, he did increase taxes. In addition,
On the lowest end, I mean $569, I think, for AGI of $36.69 and above tax increase. Thank you, President Reagan. Anyway, my next topic next week is going to be America's future. Life will suck, then you will die if we don't change our ways. See you next week, people.
Okay, who's next? Come on up here.
Okay, what a great subject for this group. Thank you. Some of the points he brought up were in the question, or what I was going to talk about was what I also heard is the scale of the debt as presented to us is actually mathematically impossible to pay off. And the way this talk was advertised, that brings up that question. I will say metal is not going to work. I agree with that. However, we probably have to get rid of this central bank system that we have. It's unnecessary. What are we going to do? Well, I also agree that the extreme voices on what is presented to us as the left and the right, which is a little bit confusing to me at this point, are louder right now with the current media. And you said we got the left and the right, and we need the moderates to be heard, and there's more of those. And that's true, but then you got people like me, and there's a lot of us now, and I'm not in the middle, I'm out here. And some people think I'm left and I'm right if I don't agree with them. And some people think when they look like this, then I'm up here, or the other way, I'm down here. But this left-right paradigm is going to kill us. The only time I ever worked for the government was when I was testing soil and concrete for the Corps of Engineers. That was unbelievable. When I started doing my job well, they fired me. They did. They didn't actually fire me. They brought me down to the federal building, surrounded me with a bunch of officers, and had me sit down like some kind of interrogation movie. Those guys with medals and all standing around me, and they're telling me to shut up and keep my nose clean, blah blah blah, because they finally. This was in the way back in the 70s. I finally said something like, "Hey, I can't work in this warehouse with that stinky forklift. There's like black smoke, and my body was sensitive, and that was it. That's what they got. They got me. So I quit that day actually. But I don't have a great feeling from federal work. I mean, this guy used to tell me, "Slow down, son, slow down." He'd be playing dominoes, I'm bored as hell. They're testing concrete, so I'm doing as fast as I can, making this perfect as I can. What else am I going to do? I'm in my 20s, Anyway, that's a distraction. But what do we do with this impossible to pay debt? I think I'm pretty much convinced that you are correct, that the way it's set up now, it's impossible. Well, this money's not real. Why pay it? We need to come up with something else. Now, your vote, you're really invested in the establishment in a way that I'm not. It's not working, but you do agree that the people who got in the street got a little more attention. I'm trying to come up with a point for this whole talk, my particular part of the talk here. I agree with the other Jim. It looks like more pain is going to come to us before anything's going to happen. But the importance of what we're doing right now, discussing these matters, is that when things start to go one way or the other, there's going to be things in flux, there'll be motion. And a lot of it's going to be downwards for us. But if we don't understand, how we're being manipulated and which facts we can rely on, so we have to educate ourselves, it's going to pan out worse, and just the people that are holding the cards now are going to get more power. Who's holding the cards now? People who make wars for us, people who send our jobs overseas. Not just jobs, whole industries. People who are selling our infrastructure. So they're manipulating these things, and we have to know this. And I know nothing's going to happen until it gets to where American people don't feel so comfortable. But when they do, this left-right paradigm is going to keep us blind. So put your allegiance to truth first before your party. There's so much that we refuse to know because it's against party lines. I mean, who's Barry Soetoro? You ask most people, they don't even know. You ought to know, especially if you love them. Thank you.
Okay, here's where I'm coming from. I'd rather live in a low-cost country than a low-tax country. And what I mean by that is what we're doing is we're cutting taxes, we're cutting NASA, we're cutting science grants, we're cutting education, we're cutting Medicare, we're cutting Social Security, we're cutting infrastructure, we're cutting environmental protection. All of those things which are cut will cost, maybe it costs the government less, but it costs each individual citizen more. It costs us more because we don't have the technologies, all those scientific developments that NASA helped develop or were developed in NASA. Those science grants, which occur in research institutions like universities across this country, incidentally, which are probably the best in the world, in no small part because of that support. Education, people going to school now, there's both nonprofit higher educational institutions, like the Ivy League schools or SMU or public schools. Their tuition is astronomical. The debt now getting out of school is $100,000. That's at some public schools. For private schools, the tuition at Harvard, I think, is $56,000 a year. I think, I heard that somewhere. I haven't corroborated that myself. Salaries and benefits, companies are not paying anymore, and salaries are not keeping up with inflation. The benefits are going down, not just health care, but really retirement. That's where I'm really coming from, because we pivoted from defined benefits to defined contributions. Back around the early 90s, I guess, is when we had a critical mass of that, when most corporations started doing that. And these days, people my age, I'm probably middle-aged right now, they don't have enough to go 2 years. If something happened, they don't have enough saved to go 2 years. When I start to retire, we're going to hit a crisis point, because I assure you, no one my age is saving enough. We're not. And what's going to happen? At some point, those services got to be provided. I mean, at some point. So I'd rather pay for them than not. But that's that situation we're in. Environmental protection. I know there's some people that give EPA a hard time, but they do serve a vital public interest. You know, I think it's to my benefit that I'm not inhaling arsenic. It's in my benefit that I'm not inhaling all these carcinogenic fumes that come out. It's to my benefit that I don't drink these pollutants. They cause cancer. It's been proven. You know, I mean, how much cost does that give to society? So the point I'm making is that that is a huge cost, and we're not thinking about that. We're thinking about saving taxes in the short term or scrimping on paying for vital the public benefit. Okay. Also, education, just like retirement. I've got, not only would someone like me have to pay for their own education, they'd have to pay for their children's education. Then by that time, they got to pay a house, mortgage. They don't have anything left to pay for retirement, so it's no wonder they're not saving. They're borrowing. Okay, foreign aid. Okay, now I acknowledge this is an absolutely complex issue. Take a look at Crimea, for instance. That is, if you believe what's in the papers. Now, what's in the papers is that we, and I think that Budapest Memorandum suggested that the agreement was that the US, Russia, and UK would defend Crimea from an invasion if that were to occur in exchange for taking their nuclear weapons. They agreed. What's happening now? Well, they're being invaded. So it's our duty, really, to follow up on that. Now, in light of the last 10 years or so, who wants to do that? There's no public support for that. There's no international support for that. So the point I'm making is we have to have influence some ways, or some people say that. We give 19 billion a year to Pakistan. What do we get for that? We give 60 billion, I'm sorry, that's 19 billion since 9/11. Okay, we give 60 billion to Iraq since 9/11. I think it's more than that, but that's a stat that I saw. We paid $11 million just to look for that Malaysian flight that went down. Why are we paying for that? You know, why are we paying for that? I mean, why is it our duty to pay for those things? We need to at least trim that. Here's the thing. When we pay taxes, I want to see the benefits. I don't want it to go to look for some Malaysian flight out in the middle of the Indian Ocean that crashed and has just one American on it. You know, I want that money I want to see education subsidized here. Okay, immigration. That's an important issue. We're not just funding people that are going to be on the dole. I mean, those people, right now, they come over here, they pay Social Security, their employers pay Social Security, they don't get benefits. They don't go to the doctor. They don't apply for benefits. They don't even vote because they're afraid that someone's going to turn them in. You know, so that's kind of a good deal for us in a way. We got someone to pick our lettuce for $1 an hour, and we don't have to pay him. That's not bad, really, if you're us. The problem is, I mean, what I do, my job, is I help a law firm get patents, okay, for their clients, which are corporations generally. Now, when I look at the inventors on those patents, I don't see a whole lot of American names. There are a lot of Chinese names and a lot of Indian names. There are not a lot of U.S. names. So that tells me that there are a lot of people that are skilled in the sciences and engineering that we're pushing out of this country. We're not going to benefit from their knowledge. I don't think that's a good idea. They're going to take that knowledge home and they're going to contribute there. We also have to acknowledge there's a severe case of Obama derangement syndrome. There's a party here that disagrees with every single thing he says just because he says it, just because they don't want him to succeed. And I don't think there's ever, well, in my lifetime, there's not been a president that has experienced that extreme source of prejudice. There has not been. That is absolutely true. So when you have, I think that's irrational and I think that's counterproductive. I don't think the same thing happened during Bush. I don't. I mean, there were, especially when he was elected, even after that controversial election, That started when it came to light about the WMDs, you know, and the lie that took us into that war. Okay. Anyway, that's about it.
Okay, come on up here.
Okay. That's great. I actually decided to just kind of look up some things because I think a lot of times people get confused between what is deficit and what is debt. And so the deficit is basically what the difference is between what we bring in and what we spend. So, you know, for example, that's what the deficit is. The debt is the cumulative amount over time. So we need to kind of separate the two because the deficit is on an annual basis, and the debt is just the long-term collection of that. Now, what most people don't understand is that the deficit went down in 2013 versus 2012. In 2012, it was 1.1 trillion. In 2013, it was 680 billion, a drop of 37%. Now, what was the reason why? Okay, well, there was a little bit more revenue coming in because the economy was starting to pick up a little bit, and there was a little bit more revenue coming in. And then, of course, there were those across-the-board spending cuts, which influenced a lot of the organizations that John talked about. Now the problem with that is, and my problem with the across-the-board tax cut or the across-the-board spending cuts is that they weren't choosing and picking where the money was going. And that's what they need to do. They need to sit down and they need to say, okay, we have this income coming in. This is what we're going to estimate coming in. Now where do we want the money? And just like what John was saying, I'd rather it be here than somewhere else. I'd rather it be helping our poor people, helping our kids get an education, helping people get health care and have a reasonable access to health care and have homes to live in, take care of the people on the streets, help them with their health care. I would rather have that money here helping our kids. We have kids that are sick and poor and hungry and without clothes and shoes, and they're getting shot on their way to school. But we're spending money to all these other, countries, and it's a lot of money. It's like billions of dollars. So if we can just figure out a way to take that deficit down over time, the debt will go down. But the money needs to go to the right places. One of the things that I was talking about earlier was, and we need to be proud because the 2013 deficit was the first sub-trillion deficit since 2008. So the deficit is going down. But what are we sacrificing for that? What are we sacrificing for that? It definitely should not be going to Walmart. They got $7.8 billion in tax breaks. Imagine what we could do with the deficit and in turn the debt if we weren't giving Walmart $7.8 billion. If we weren't giving ExxonMobil $600 million in tax breaks when they profited $9.5 billion last year. A 13% tax rate is all they're paying. What can we do if we're not giving ExxonMobil $600 billion? What can we do with that money? It's a lot of money. It could really help a lot of people. It could help give people health care. It could help people with all kinds of things. And instead, in addition, we're paying for things that aren't good for our society. We're paying for massive incarceration of our people. We're paying for state-sanctioned murder. We're paying for massive tax breaks not only to corporations but to rich people. And we're spending money on rebuilding other countries when our infrastructure is crumbling. So that's what I meant when I was asking that question earlier. We need people that are going to make these hard choices and decide that the American population is the priority and everybody deserves access to, to a roof over their head, to food, to health care, and to all of these things, because nobody's going to be able to succeed if they don't have food and they don't have clothing and they don't have the things that they need. And it's not, we see all those UNICEF commercials and it's really sad that people are dying of starvation in Africa. I agree with that. It's very sad. But we have some of our children dying of starvation and healthcare problems and other things here. We have people dying of preventable diseases that shouldn't be prevented here, and we're not a third world country. We may be if we continue on this road, but we're not. We have great jobs. We have sustained, the economy's building. That's why the deficit dropped a little bit last year. And there are jobs out there, but we just don't have educated people to do them. There are lots of science jobs, lots of engineering jobs, but we don't have enough American people. And when it comes to, I have two friends that are trying to get citizenship in this country, and they are both on like long-term wait lists. It takes forever to become a citizen of this country, and they've been here for many, many years, paying taxes, working hard. I mean, if they want to become a citizen, we should allow them to. They shouldn't take 5, 6, 7 years on a wait list. So there's a lot that we need to do to make this place a better place. And I think that we need to make those hard choices, and we need to decide where our money's going. And it should be helping the American population, not to tax breaks for multi-billion-dollar corporations like ExxonMobil and Walmart, and going to Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan and all these places that hate us, even though we're giving them money. And we should not be incarcerating our people. We should not be doing these things. We need to put the money in the right places. Thank you.
Okay, who's next? Is there a next? Come on up here, Al.
Well, I came here not expecting to talk about anything, but I took a note. You're so stimulating. It's very interesting. As I've mentioned before, I was invited by a friend a few years ago to come to this group. And then I kept coming because, I mean, it was almost a shock to come here the first time. I had never been in such a liberal mindset. So I started coming because I wanted to learn to understand that mindset, because all of us are part of one humanity. And as I've said before, I think that liberal-minded people are very compassionate, and they care very much about their fellow man, and I support that completely. I think, however, the more emotion, like I've said before, that you have involved with anything, the more distorted is one's perception of reality. And that's why in all important issues it's necessary to push those emotions aside and think logically and clearly, regardless of where it takes you. Years ago, I took mentally to myself everything I believed in, right down to my fundamental beliefs in God, and I put them on the table and I said, okay, all of that's there for the challenge, and if anybody can prove any bit of it wrong, I didn't want it in the first place. And we need to do that with everything. We are the most deceived people, I want to say on earth, but I think entirely all over the earth that one can imagine. The people who are ruling this earth are so brilliant that we never see them. And their strongest arm is the banking system. It is the fluid, the blood system that pays for everything. And it's this fiat money system. The Fed has never been regulated. It's never been looked through, so that we don't know what it does, but they can print any amount of money. It's just paper. Let's fill the room with it and put it behind any cause they want. And that's exactly why Thomas Jefferson said, if we ever, and I've said this 1,000 times, if we ever let a private bank take control of our money through inflation and deflation and the corporate structure that will grow up around it, i.e. fascism, which is exactly what we're faced with today when you're talking about the large corporations. I totally agree with that position. This country got to its position of preeminence in the world and created more free, happy, well-furnished people through free enterprise. Now, free enterprise requires regulation, like the antitrust laws, which have not been used for years. The non-use of antitrust laws have allowed fascism to develop in this country. And when we have, like Eisenhower said, the military-industrial group ruling everything. This is fascism. That's exactly what it is. And the banking system, you know, in Iceland, that was a small community. They could do it more easily. They realized that the bankers had put them into their financial collapse and it was artificial, and they did it because they wanted to steal all the property they could. Exactly like Thomas Jefferson said, that, you know, they will steal all the property from our descendants and leave them homeless in the land that we have founded. It took the Federal Reserve 16 years to bring about the great collapse of 1929, and that banking, the lending system, stole millions and millions and millions of dollars of property through that thing. And every time they brought on one of those, they've done it. It does not happen when you do not have debt money. Now, if the Constitution forbids the Federal Reserve, it remains today unconstitutional. The senator who stood up on the floor and said that it has been ratified by the number of states to be an amendment to the Constitution lied. The research has been done. If you will just get there and research it, you'll find that out. It was never ratified. Both the Internal Revenue Act and the Federal Reserve Act were passed as a pair because the taxes that we pay in income tax do not go to run one damn thing in our government. They do not help the people. They do one thing, and that is pay down on the debt, which is created by charging interest through that bank to loan money to our government. That's where it comes from. And they have no value to loan upon. They just entered in the computer and, hey, government, yeah, there's $100 billion. You owe us a percentage on that every year. That's where that debt comes from. It's fraudulent, and we need to do what they did in Iceland. They took thousands of people with pots and spoons, and they surrounded their Congress buildings, and they battered and beat these pots and pans for days and ran their damn government out. The people then held new elections and elected an all-new government and started criminally prosecuting the bankers. The key problem we have in this world is the banking institution. The problem over in Ukraine, if you're going to listen to American media, you're going to remain stupid. You cannot use American media today. It is, by the 1930s, the Rothschild banking system had bought up and controlled almost all of the major media in the United States. You look to other countries, read what they're saying. The effort in Ukraine, that government, I listened to a presentation given by a lady who ran for president in Ukraine some years ago. She lost to the man who won. He immediately allied with the World Bank International Monetary Fund, and they put into Ukraine the equivalent of the Federal Reserve, and they put in the equivalent of Wall Street. And within a few years, those people became millionaires across the board practically, and the rest of the country saw a 40% decrease in average income. 40%. Now, the president that this little revolution ran out wanted to go with Russia because Russia has kicked the Rothschild banking system out of their country, as has Hungary and Iceland, hopefully Ireland. The people have been out in the streets trying to prosecute the bankers, get them criminally prosecuted. We need to wake up and do that. We need about 5 million people to go to Washington, D.C. with their pots and pans. And we need to do that. And if we don't do something radical in this country, you need to look into the fact that all of these people who rule this world are extremely occult. People who hold themselves out as being loyal Anglican or Catholic or Buddhist or whatever fits in their society, this is sheep dipping. You put a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's an intelligence term. These people are very occult. Most of them are Satanists. If you go to Kimball Castle, Colorado on the internet, you will find that the George Bush family went to these satanic rituals numerous times at Kimball Castle up in Colorado. These people are so evil, it's just hard to express it. Okay, I had opportunity years ago to read directly, hold in my hands here, part of the Federal Reserve manuals that a fellow had managed to buy at a yard sale that I'm sure the Fed here locally never knew even got out of the building. The man died who had them. He was a former head of the chairman of the board. It stated clearly in there that the chairman of the Federal Reserve in Washington is supreme in power. I read this, folks. Is supreme in power over the President of the United States, over the Congress of the United States, and over the judicial branch of the United States. He is the dictator of this country. He is the dictator of this country. And we need to learn this, and I'm going to try to stretch it a little. There is a book written by a doctor from Guyana. He lives in Houston. I think he's a dentist or whatever. World Bank came in there, International Monetary Fund, whichever one. Happy third world country. If anybody was hungry, they just stepped off the road and picked a fresh piece of fruit here and there. I mean, they had abundance of what they needed. They were a third world country, but they were happy. They had a happy tourist trade. Nobody was starving. Everybody was getting along well. And then this banking system comes in and probably buys off their president and their Congress, and they say, hey, look, you need to stop being a third world country. You need to join the modern world. You need sewage systems. You need bridges. You need all this stuff. Today, the debt on their the interest on their national debt exceeds their gross national product. And that is what this banking system has been, there are books written on this, has been doing all over the world. It is evil. And we need to wake up to that and realize that the Federal Reserve is the strongest arm that it has. The Federal Reserve largely supports the CIA. That is in those manuals also. I read that. Now, that's off the books. That means, and that, to me, this is totally unacceptable. That means they can give any amount of money to that thug group, the CIA, that then went and created Al-Qaeda and still runs Al-Qaeda, and they paid 250,000 Al-Qaeda vicious, psychopathic radicals and armed them to invade Libya and destroy the happiest, most prosperous nation in Africa. And it goes on and on and on, and that is where we need to focus, folks, is that banking system and all our other little issues of liberal and conservative and Republican and Democrat and all of this stuff way down here at this level that keeps us from seeing the truth. We need to dispense with and realize we are one people who are all being victimized by pitting different groups against each other, particularly making them go to war and kill each other. This banking system murdered 550,000 people in Libya to destroy a gold-backed banking system. And it just goes on and on.
Okay, who's next? Have we got a next? All right, we're getting close on time. Any more? All right. I guess we're out of people. I'm the last man standing. So I want to thank our speaker for waking us up tonight. I think he did a terrific job. And I could only add to this, excuse me, we have now I'm forgetting what I wanted to say, but that's all right. Senior moment, that's what it is. Yeah. Anyway, we have some. I think it was Winston Churchill said that. I forget how he put it. I forget what he forgot. What he wanted to say. It doesn't matter. Anyway, he said that Americans will always figure it out after they try everything else. So we've got to try everything else before we figure out what to do, and that's part of our problem. I think personally that we have, I listened to what he said about the banking system, etc. That's part of our problem. But and I really appreciate our speaker for addressing the fact that if we all wake up, we might be able to do something, because that's what's required for us to do. I look at our situation today in our country. We have the best, I mentioned this before, we have the best Congress money can buy. And that's, to me, is the biggest problem we have. Nothing gets done because the corporations are controlling the Congress, and by definition, that's fascism. That has to change. And one way to change that is, in my view anyway, is to get Congress to act in its own self-interest to instruct the Federal Communications Commission to require the media provide sufficient free airtime for federal candidates in general elections to air their views. If you did that, you'd change everything. You'd end up, congressmen that we elect would represent the district instead of representing the people buying their vote in Washington, which is required. And then we might change some other rules, such as our corporations leave town, they go overseas where labor costs are cheaper, they sell everything back to us. Eventually we don't have the money to buy things because we don't have the jobs here. That's part of the problem. So we got to recognize that things that are produced in your country and sold in your country, you're better off than shipping it overseas and shipping it back. So we need to put tariffs on corporations that go overseas, that anything they ship back here, that they put a tariff on it. The difference in labor costs, they pay the difference. And you say, well, if you don't want to pay the tariff, you can produce it here. Then we'll have jobs here. Look, you'll produce jobs here for what's sold here. That's one way to change things. And if you could do that, then maybe you could shorten the workday in the country. We got 25 million people out of work. And since the Industrial Revolution, you know, machines replace people, machines don't pay taxes. It's been going on since the beginning of time. I was in the railroad industry. We had 5 people on a train. Now we have 2. We got 5 people on pension for everyone that's working now. That's how bad it is. So this has been going on all over. We have different corporations that they got robots instead of people, and it's a constant thing. So this has to be addressed. And I think that the biggest problem, as I said before, is that we got the best Congress money can buy. That has to change. If we change that, we can change a lot of things. We can put tariffs on corporations, we can shorten the workday, we can put our people back to work, and we can have a vibrant economy. We'll have people paying taxes instead of draining taxes. The government get a twofold benefit of increased tax revenue without raising taxes. A little less bills to pay for people that aren't working because they'll be working. That's how you drive an economy. That's how you pick things up. That's how things can happen. Anyway, that's my view. Now our speaker gets to comment on all these comments and close this meeting.
Well, I think we probably have heard enough. I do want to thank everybody who commented on it, because I know I don't have all the answers to all the questions, and some of the issues you raised caused me to look at it, try to go back and look at it again. But the issues you stated are true, and you know, that's why I try to put emphasis on what's in our national interest. And if we can decide what's in our national interest, then we can allocate resources appropriately. But if we America is a reactive nation. We don't proact, we react. And that's what creates a lot of the problems, because we react and we get focused without what he said, you got to look at it and think about it before you move on it. And so I appreciate everything everybody said. I don't share some of the beliefs, but I may be wrong. But I know the banks. I said here when the women tried to hang me last time, I said banks is like a wife. You can't live good with them, and you can't live without them. So I think that's where banks play a role, but they do need to be regulated. They shouldn't be manipulated tools. Thank you all for listening to me, and I enjoyed the interaction. Thank you.
Well, I said we're going to retire. This place closes at 9, which is like in 10 minutes. So we're going to retire down to Starbucks. You're more than welcome. You're welcome.
Go check it.
Well, whatever, but you're welcome. We'll take care of your coffee and whatnot. And so we'll all retire to Starbucks, and you're all welcome to go there until next week. Thank you.
This is William, your videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like us, or follow us, and get notices of all our videos. We love it even when you call. So when visiting the Barbeck's restaurant, tell them you want your reservation to the next College of Complex class.